Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. I'm Jalen McGee, and I'm a product manager on the Azure Arc team. And I'm here to talk today about the Azure Arc Gateway, which is a new networking related feature that we're making available for Azure Arc. So what I'll do today is kind of give a conceptual overview, and then I'll give some details about the limited public preview that we just released for this feature. So I wanted to start for folks who may be unfamiliar with just a bit of details about the problem that we're solving with the Art Gateway and that we're addressing. And to start, I wanted to share this kind of table here for Arc-enabled servers. So these are the required endpoints for customers who have enterprise proxies or firewalls. These endpoints must be allowed in those in your proxy or your firewall in order to get started with Arc-enabled servers. And you can see there are about 15 different endpoints here. And one of the pieces of feedback that we've gotten is that this list is large for customers who have who really value their security, which all do, and have those proxies and firewalls. Even getting one of these endpoints allowed can take some time for a security team to evaluate and for a networking team to vet and then allow in a proxy or a firewall. So the primary piece of feedback that we've gotten is that one, this list being as long as it is really a challenge. And then two, the fact that there are wildcard endpoints required is also a challenge for customers because convincing your security and networking team to allow a wildcard endpoint can be really challenging. So another kind of thing that I'll point out about this is just for the core Arc-enabled server like onboarding scenario. And as you use more Arc scenarios and extensions, this list grows. So there will be more and more endpoints required as you grow your use of Azure Arc and Azure Arc enabled services. So this is the list for Arc enabled servers, and then this is the list for Arc enabled Kubernetes. It's similar in nature. And we've heard similar feedback about this list. It's too long. There are wildcard endpoints that we can't justify, and we really need to cut that down. So if we go to the next slide here, this kind of summarizes what I just mentioned. If a customer were to use all Arc-enabled scenarios, the list of endpoints required could grow into the 150 plus range. And so that's really a challenge that we've heard from customers and that we really want to address because networking is essentially a prerequisite that you need to satisfy before you can begin even doing a proof of concept. So we want to reduce that operational burden that's there and reduce the number of endpoints that you need to allow to get started. Um, and that's the entire intention behind the Arc Gateway, to reduce the list of URLs that must be opened in proxies and firewalls to use Azure Arc. So if we go to the next slide here, I'm going to be giving just a very 10,000 foot level view of how the Arc Gateway works and kind of the what the purpose of it is. So this should actually be titled differently. That's my mistake. But essentially, the Art Gateway works by introducing two new components. First is the Art Gateway component in the cloud. So each customer will create an Arc Gateway resource. It's an Azure resource that you will use Azure to create. And this serves as the common front end for all of your infrastructure traffic between Azure and on-prem. And this gateway is served on a specific domain. So once you create your gateway resource, each customer's gateway will have its own gateway URL. And then that gateway URL is one of the few that you then allow in your proxy or firewall. And I have a graphic on the next slide that will go a little bit into more detail. But oh, and you can go back. Sorry about that. I referenced the next one. But so that's the first component, the Arc Gateway in the cloud. And then the second component that's introduced as part of the gateway is called the Azure Arc Proxy. And this is the on-prem component. So this is part of the Arc agent. And this Azure Arc Proxy routes all Arc agency traffic to its destination in Azure via Arc Gateway. So this proxy is part of the core Arc agentry. And like I mentioned, it runs within the context of an Arc-enabled resource. So every Arc-enabled resource gets its own Azure Arc proxy as part of the Arc agent. The Azure Arc proxy does not require any configuration on customers' part. Is simply added to the Arc agent. You don't need to manage it. You don't need to do anything extra. Once you onboard a resource to Arc or to Azure, then the Azure Arc proxy just comes as part of that. Nothing extra is required of you. So now we can go to the next slide. So I have these kind of two graphics that just illustrate how it works. So here on the left is the prior network configuration without Arc Gateway. So you can see we have all the Azure services up in Azure. And then for our customers who have enterprise proxies, all those endpoints that I showed on the first couple slides, those endpoints are required for each of the Azure services. Entra ID has 3 different endpoints. Connect has 2 or so endpoints. Each extension has their own list of endpoints, and then each other Azure service has its own list of endpoints. And as you can see on the left, because you're kind of communicating directly with those endpoints, you need to allow each of those endpoints in your enterprise proxy. And that's really the challenge that our customers are having. And now on the right, you see with the new network configuration with the Arc Gateway in place. So the 2 new components that I mentioned on the previous slide were added. First is the Arc Gateway resource in Azure. So you create that gateway resource, and then you get a URL for that Arc Gateway. It will be xyz.gw.arc.azure.com. So you essentially allow that in your proxy, plus a couple others plus a couple other URLs that will still be required. These will not be wildcard URLs, but it is much fewer than the list required. There's about 7 URLs required in our current state. We want to continue reducing that list. But essentially, you allow that gateway URL in your proxy. And then the Azure Arc proxy, as you can see, is just added to the Arc agent. And then all the agentry traffic will be proxied via the Azure Arc proxy to the Arc gateway in the cloud. And then the traffic is forwarded to its destination service from there. So that's how we're cutting down on the list of URLs that are required by introducing that kind of intermediary, that Arc gateway that controls or essentially sends traffic to its relevant destination in Azure. So you can go to the next slide here. So like I mentioned, we have a limited public preview out now for Arc-enabled servers and Azure Stack HCI. This limited public preview is a CLI only experience. So you'll essentially use an Azure CLI to create, you'll use Azure CLI to create your gateway resource. And then from there, you'll get that gateway URL. And then in the documentation, it tells you the additional 5 or 6 URLs that are still required. And it also tells you the scenarios that are covered as part of the Arc Gateway. So essentially, once you create your Arc Gateway resource and you allow the URLs that we require, then you can use any of those scenarios without having to revisit your proxy and allow more URLs. That's, as I mentioned, one of the really key things that we're looking to support with the gateway is make it so you visit your proxy once to configure all the required endpoints for Arc, and then you don't have to visit it again as you continue to adopt more scenarios. That's a really key point that we want to continue to make sure the gateway provides. We have a few scenarios enabled now as part of the limited public preview. Those scenarios are listed in the documentation, but we're going to continue to grow the number of scenarios that are covered by the Arc gateway. So you essentially configure proxy or firewalls once, and you don't have to touch them again, and you can continue to adopt more and more Arc scenarios. So we have a limited public preview sign-up form that's linked here. Essentially, as part of the sign-up form, you provide the subscriptions that you want the feature enabled on. And then I personally will reach back out to you once we allow those subscriptions within one day or so. And then you'll be able to follow the documentation and move forward with the rest of the steps. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is linked here. But yeah, thank you for the time.